Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you all are joining us from today. We are going to go ahead and get started. We are very excited to be sharing our learnings with you today on our work on unlocking flexible plastics recycling in Buenos Aires. But before we begin, I just want to do a quick run through of our agenda and some housekeeping items. So to kick us off, I will be welcoming Ivan from Dow and Nicola from the Lion's Den Plastic Waste to share a little bit about their involvement in this project, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to make this work possible. That following, we will have Jeremy, who is our Director of Partnerships, speak a little bit to our work at Delterra and how we operate, which will provide some great context into the next phase, which Rainier will be going into, and that will be the details on our work in Buenos Aires. At the end, we will be opening up for Q&A, and so please feel free to use the Q&A functionality available in Teams to drop your questions throughout. And then toward the end, we'll answer those questions live. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Ivan.
Hi all, it's a pleasure for me to be part of this webinar. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Ivan Marcó. I'm located in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm Sustainability Manager for the business of packaging and specialty plastics for Dow in Latin America. Dow is one of the main leaders of material science company in the world. We work every day to understand market needs, and throughout our products and services, try to offer and deliver solutions across the value chain. We are convinced that innovation, collaboration, and social inclusion are key pillars to build a sustainable future. And we are also fully committed to create and bring sustainable products to the market that reduce environmental impact and promote circularity. So this project is part of this strategy, and also is part of understanding the market needs. The market is asking for more sustainable products, for competitive products. So for that, we have to work a lot in connecting waste to demand, and this project is part of that. We worked a lot in trying to deeply understand the waste stream, to understand the current installed capacity of recycling in Argentina, and then analyze if this installed capacity is able to connect the waste stream with the demand. So it was a pleasure and a huge challenge to work here, but we learned a lot. So I hope you can enjoy the presentation and the outcomes that we have in during these projects.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Nicola, over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks a lot to the Delterra team for the kind invitation to join today. My name is Nicola Lelli. I'm based in Switzerland, and I've been working for the Alliance to End Plastic Waste as a strategic advisor for the last 3 years. Prior to the Alliance, I've worked in different roles, both global and regional, in the plastic adhesive and coating sector for many years. For those who are not familiar with the Alliance, we are a global nonprofit established in 2019. We have been founded and we are funded by the industry, so industry-led, with our members basically ranging through all of the plastic value chain. We call ourselves a do tank, so we are focused on action. So our job is to develop and to execute projects on the ground with local and with global partners such as Delterra, and you will see an example of that today. Our main objective is both to reduce and eliminate plastic pollution in the environment, as well as accelerating plastic circularity. End of 2024, we revised our strategy, which we started to develop to implement this year in 2025, which basically focus on impact at scale through country and thematic programs, which are built with strategically connected projects, which aim at developing integrated solutions for the industry. Through these programs, we aim at achieving system impact in different critical countries and different critical areas such as plastic flexibles. And I'm currently involved in one of these thematic program called Thematic Program Flexibles. Well, our final goal is to develop economically viable system with improved flexible circularity. And what you will see today from Delterra, I think, is a very good example of that ambition and those goals. Once again, thanks a lot for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Ivana Nicola. Jeremy, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Steph. Thanks everyone for joining. My name's Jeremy Douglas. I'm Director of Partnerships with Delterra. I think most people are familiar with Delterra, but I'll just give you a quick refresh and recap of who we are and what we do. So we're a nonprofit organization. We exist because of the support of partners like the Alliance to End Plastic Waste and Dow and many others who we partner with around the world. Our goal is to reduce the environmental and social impact of waste on the planet. We feel that there's far too much material that is going to landfill, being burned, ending up in the environment, and that there are actually solutions to be able to put that back into productive use. We uniquely look at all types of waste. So plastic, of course, gets a lot of attention, but organic materials, cardboard, metal, there's lots of things that end up in places they shouldn't, that we're trying to find solutions for. And so we really fill those gaps in different countries around the world. So on the next slide, you'll see where we work is in Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, and the US. So we started out in Argentina and Indonesia, two very different geographies, to see what can be universally applied across those different geographies, and then what is very culturally, geographically unique to those, and how can we create programs that can be scaled to other locations. So then based on those learnings, we started in Brazil about 2 years ago, and we started in the US like a day ago. Basically, we're just beginning in the US, our program there, which is going to replicate a lot of the learnings that you're hear about today on flexible plastic recycling, which is becoming a big topic for California, for example, and actually many EPR systems globally. So hopefully what you'll hear today will be relevant no matter where you're working. So on the next slide, just a little bit about how we work. We are focused on changing the entire waste and recycling system. So we don't just work on flexible plastics, even though that's going to be one of the topics you hear about today. But we think that fundamentally the supply and demand of recycled materials is not working as well as it could be. And so we really support at the subnational level, mostly working with municipalities and then all of the stakeholders involved there. So supporting cities to improve their waste management practices, working on behavior change at the household level, getting people to separate into different streams. How is that collected? How is that separated at MRFs or material recovery facilities? And then on the demand side, who is buying that material? And is there enough of a stable price and a signal to be able to justify all of that collection? So we work across that value chain and feel that that is actually what's going to create long-term sustainable and scalable impact, is when the whole system is working better rather than just one component of it. So we're grateful that Dow and the Alliance and many other partners also share that vision that we have to change the entire waste and recycling system. And that's what we're focused on in the places we work. So that's a little bit about Delterra. If anyone wants to find out more, we would love to talk to you about that. But let's go over to the main topic of today's presentation, which is Rainier and the work that we've been doing on flexible plastic recycling in Argentina. So over to you, Rainier.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivan. Thank you, Nicola, for the introductions, and for Jeremy for introducing Delterra. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll take you through a project that we launched in partnership in Argentina, specifically Greater Buenos Aires, targeted at increasing flexible plastic recycling, specifically flexible plastics from post-domestic or post-consumer sources. And that's key, because if you look at what type of flexible plastic is recycled today in these countries, in Latin America, the vast majority is post-industrial, post-commercial. It is not the materials that you and I consume at our homes with our families, or even to a large degree in offices or restaurants, the materials that go to municipal solid waste. Those materials, those flexible plastics, they account for about 40% of what we consume at home, yet less than 3% is actually recycled. And that is a big challenge. If you compare it, and I'll do it in just a second, to other plastics such as rigids, it is far lower. Why is it an even bigger challenge? Because by 2040, the amount of plastic waste that is expected to be generated is expected to be triple, which leads to much more mismanaged waste if unaddressed. And it is these flexible plastics that have a greater risk of leaking into the environment because of their lightweight and small sizes. They are very prevalent in what we consume today. They are in many different products that we use. And if they are mismanaged, they can go with the wind, they can leak into the environment very quickly. It is difficult to collect these materials. It is very difficult to sort them as well because they are of different types and sizes. They require additional separation and they require washing. With that, it's also a lost economic opportunity. A lot of this material is recyclable in a mechanical manner. It is monomaterial. It can be recycled with machinery that exists today. It doesn't necessarily need chemical recycling, although it could help. So what we're missing, what's being left on the table, is economic value in a place where economic value is so desperately necessary because many of the poorest of the poor operate in the sector of waste, and they try to recover value from waste. All that being said, there are a lot of barriers that are preventing, not just in Argentina, also in Brazil, where we work a lot, in Colombia and Mexico, all over Latin America, and one could argue across the global south, recycling of flexible plastics to reach scale. So that was the starting point from which we departed. Zooming in a bit more particular on the cities where we worked, we focused on Greater Buenos Aires for many reasons. Some of them are on this page, the most important ones. First of all, Greater Buenos Aires is a massive concentration of people. 16 million people live here. It is home to 35% of Argentina. It's the 14th largest metropolis in the world. And with it, there is a massive concentration of waste. 750,000 tons per year of plastic waste are being generated here. There's extensive underutilized waste management infrastructure. What do we mean by that? When you come to Buenos Aires, one thing you'll notice, streets are actually pretty clean. At least I find them clean, and many people here do. Why is that? Cities prioritize clean streets, clean cities, making sure that the waste is collected extensively. Where I live, it is not uncommon for the waste to be collected, or it's not uncommon in many places where I live, the waste is collected 6 times per week in front of my door. That's mixed waste. I also have recyclable collection points around the corner. Recyclables get collected once a week as well, as do pruning and organic waste. So there's a lot of investment into this collection of waste. And just in sorting centers alone, there's 25 of them. We estimate over 55 million of original capex has been invested in sorting center capacity. Over 8,000 people work in them. A lot of these sorting centers are very manual, as you see in this picture. Conveyor belts with people manually separating selective waste. These sorting centers are operated by waste worker cooperatives that fill a crucial role also in society. They allow for social inclusion. So they're a fundament of the local economy. The problem is they could do much more. They were constructed to be able to process much more waste than they do today. And if you look what is actually sorted in these sorting centers, you will see that it's mostly the high value materials, PET, HDPE, aluminium cans, but it is not necessarily the material that arrives always, such as flexible plastics. Then there's a few other components that are key, and we'll come back to this near the end of the presentation. Greater Buenos Aires has one of the largest, if not the largest, landfill in Latin America. Seamse landfill receives 5,200 kilotons, so that's over 5 million tons per year of municipal solid waste. That's 18,000 tons a day, if you want to do the math quickly. That is very large. In it, there's also a mechanical biological treatment facility operated by one of the partners in this project, Texan. This is an MBT that receives 1,500 tons per day, so less than 10% of the total landfill, and processes it and tries to reduce the amount of organic waste that's sent to landfill because that's quite expensive. But what it means is you have this huge building, and you'll see it in a bit, where waste comes in, gets processed, yet all the recyclables are not taken out and go to landfill. That is, in our opinion, a lost opportunity. So we try to look together with Dow, together with Benito, okay, what can we do about that? And we'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. And a final point, of course, it's also about what is the budget available. When you start looking into it, and there's many ways to calculate numbers, but what we see across the board is that Buenos Aires spends amongst the highest percentage of its municipal budget on waste management of all cities in the world. And that is to afford all that extensive infrastructure we saw before. In many ways, that's a perfect situation to work in. The challenge is what if it's not efficient the way the money is being spent? What if it only focuses on some materials and not all recyclables? And that's what you start seeing here. So we broke down plastics into 3 categories. There's many ways to do this. But if you think about what really has higher value, what is more valuable to sort, if you're a waste worker, it is PET, it's HDPE. And what you see is what you would expect. 20% of these materials that come from post-domestic sources, from municipal solid waste, actually get recycled. And what gets rejected is only a very small portion of it. Basically, if a PET bottle or if a shampoo bottle arrives at the sorting center, you can expect that it's going to get sorted and it will get recycled, unless it's, for example, broken or highly contaminated. Then if you look at the flexible plastics, a very different pattern emerges. Only 2 to 3% of it gets recycled. And why is that? It's not only because of the lack of materials coming in. The majority of the materials coming into the sorting centers are actually rejected and are not sent to recyclers. So even if someone separates it correctly at home, it might not find its way to a recycler. Why? Well, because these materials are often very small. They are very different than what they look like. It could be PE, it could be PP, it could be colored, it could be non-colored, but above all, there's not a clear demand signal for these materials. And one thing that you don't have in Argentina is regulation to encourage greater sortation and recycling rates. There is no EPR in this way. So contrary to Brazil, where there's already a reverse logistics system, there is none in Argentina, which means that the business has to be profitable in and of itself, preventing scale from being reached. It creates a very interesting opportunity though. Can you make a self-sustaining business in such conditions when there is no regulation? Well, that's what we were trying to figure out. I want to show one more point about this because I was talking before about the amount that's rejected and recycled. This is what reaches sorting centers. Another 9% reaches the MBT from the materials. And those are not sorted. They go straight to landfill, even though they go through certain steps of machinery and automatic sortation where it could easily be done. Again, why is that happening? You'll see it's also a lack of a clear demand signal and an ability to work with this material. I'll leave the other plastics such as PS, PVC, multi-layer out of scope for now. They face much greater challenges. They're also a smaller part of the overall consumption. I touched on quite some of these topics already. Just to go and think about what are the biggest bottlenecks preventing this market from working? Why isn't it fixed already? At the start, there is low separation at source of flexible plastics by households and businesses. 93% of what is being consumed ends up in mixed waste. Why is that? Lack of education, for example. Not everybody knows that this can be sorted. Lack of convenience, a focus on rigid materials, not flexibles. But in general, many people are accustomed to just throw mixed waste together and don't have the muscle to separate at home, or the ability to do so, or the willingness to do so. So source separation is definitely a huge problem. Now, in the sortation, there are many challenges. You see some here in yellow. But in general, let's say there is capacity to do more, and we proved in this project that it could happen. So that we didn't see as the biggest bottleneck. There are, however, bottlenecks when you think about recycling and buyers. The recyclers, as I said, prefer post-industrial scrap. It's clean, it's homogeneous, it's large, it is easier to recycle. So that's where the focus has been. And the available capacity was pretty much on that. And if recyclers were getting ambitions and wanted to grow, they would more quickly opt for vertical integration, creating their own packaging, for example, than try to broaden the volume of materials that they were recycling, even though the access to these feedstock was there. And there's also a problem in that many of these recyclers are professional, large businesses. They are accustomed to working with post-industrial scrap that comes from one source, and there was a disconnect often, let's say a lack of trust in working with the cooperatives and the sorting centers. A lack of trust that the PET recyclers or the HDP recyclers did overcome. That trust was built and they do source from these locations. But for flexible plastic recyclers, it didn't really happen yet. And then when you think about what really is the crux driving all of these different patterns, it's a lack of end buyer demand. Converters and end buyers, packagers, transformers, they prefer virgin plastic. Of course they do. It is cleaner, it is more consistent, it has higher performance, and they have developed their entire production facilities around these. Working with PCR is more complicated, it is more unpredictable, it's more volatile. So by default, they need to be compensated, as they say it, or then the price needs to be sufficiently attractive to make the business work, to have the extra effort of working with PCR. And that, and I think Ivan, if we have any questions on this, can tell us much more about it, how they see this at Dow every day. But that created this difficulty that as long as virgin plastic prices are low, and they're in a historically low position, the demand for PCR is not very high. So how could you change this? How could you change these bottlenecks around? Stimulating demand is perhaps the most important push that needs to come, and the rest of the system can accommodate. But that in and of itself is not enough, because if you just stimulate demand, you need to have supply. And even if you have demand and supply, are the recyclers ready to work with these materials? That led us to work with these three different levers, if we may call them, in parallel. And now this is a virtuous cycle. Strengthening one step will strengthen the other, can strengthen the other, etc., etc., or vice versa. You need to start somewhere. We started with increasing the feedstock supply. We started with working with cooperatives and sorting centers. That need not be the case. You can start at any point and the logic will follow. In this presentation, we'll go through these steps in this order. What did we do? This is where Nicola and the Alliance and Plastic Waste came in. We partnered together and we shared our observations of the opportunities in Buenos Aires, and we designed a project in which we were going to do several steps. Within this first step on increasing feedstock, where we partnered together with APW, we said, let's try to win trust. And how do you win trust? By coming to the cooperatives and showing that there is a consistency in the willingness to buy these materials. We visited over 20 sorting centers, and almost all of them said the same thing. I would be able to separate the more flexible plastics. They arrive here. I don't, because sometimes someone comes and buys it, but very often they come sporadically, it's unpredictable. The prices that they're willing to pay are inconsistent. They differ a lot. So what happens when I start sorting as a sorting center, my flexible plastics that arrive here, I need to stock them up. It takes a lot of space, and I'm not sure when I'm going to sell it. And there have been several examples of brands, companies with the best intentions coming and saying, I'm going to start buying flexible plastics from you. And they do for a month or for 2 months. They even donate the press. It's happened many times. There's a beautiful photo up, and then they don't come back. And the sorting center is left with change their operations and dedicated more people on the line to separating flexible plastics. No one to sell it to. So what we needed to do is we need to start with building that trust, and we did that by saying, we're going to introduce a short-term subsidy made possible thanks to APW, and we're going to pay you a market price or above the market price for this material. So 50% above, but that subsidy is going to go down. In a way, it's like a modulated EPR fee, because we don't have EPR here. We inflated the price, and what we did differently than in some other countries, we made that inflation temporary. After a year, the inflation of the price would go down. So the subsidy would be phased out, and we were very clear about that. How would that work? Because the hypothesis was, and I think it proved it was possible, or it proved to be the case, once the recycler and the sorting center establish trust, like is the case with PT and HTP, once there is the rhythm in when collection happens and when that uncomfortable position of getting to build a partnership has been overcome, then it will flow. Of course, we will get to the recyclers. It needs to be profitable for them as well. They need to have demand, but that trust was key. We did one more thing, and this was made possible thanks to Buenos Aires Buyers Store the University of Austral and Accenture, that's quite a few players. We went in and we trained 500 waste workers, not only on identifying the difference between PE and PP, or that flexible plastics have value, no, but in forming a team, in teamwork, but also in safety and health, which is so vital in these dangerous circumstances where they often work, in productivity, even on administration, which you don't see here on the page. And these waste workers, often they are willing to step up and find a job, formalize themselves. They come from informal situations. They might have lost their job. They might have had nothing at that point in time when they started becoming a waste worker, because nobody dreams of becoming a waste worker from very young. Often they find themselves in this position, and there is a willingness to do more. We didn't do one training session. We didn't do it remote. We did it in person in the university, 8 modules. Everybody came back 8 times. And if they came back 8 times and they sat through these classes given by university professors that were very engaging, they would get a diploma that would also help them in their career mobility on afterwards. And we would welcome that. It would be a success if, thanks to these training programs, they would be able to find a better job, and someone else would fill their place and they would get training as well. So the training was key to building trust as well and goodwill. And then the third thing we did is traceability when you start working in the sector is key, because at the end of the day, it is a murky business and there's a lot of ethical question marks around where does this come from? Is this extortion of waste workers? Is this child labor? We wanted to make sure that the materials that we sourced from were ethically sourced by waste workers in safe conditions. And to do that, we used the Empower blockchain backed by GS1 standards. Happy to tell you much more about it if there's interest in those details. But what we did is we verified every transaction, not just the flow of materials, but also the weighbridge receipt when it arrived at the recycler, a copy of the invoice. It all went into the blockchain solution and we had everything. And that gave as well the Alliance to End Plastic Waste transparency that this impact that we were creating was real. And to this day, just a few weeks ago, they asked me, could you share me again some of the impact that was made in this month? And we have it already. It really helps. So the second pillar, one more thing. Impacts, right? Why did we do all of this? At the end of the day, what we were able to do is we were able to double the amount of flexible plastics being sorted in sorting centers and sold to recyclers. That was about 500 tons per month extra compared to before. So in terms of feedstocks, I mean, there was this big boost, twice as much as there was, and it was well sorted. Then we worked on the demand side. So the demand side is, what is the value of these materials, and is anybody willing to buy this? Even before, or irrespective of what the recycler does, is someone willing to buy the material that the recycler creates? And what did we discover? And here Dow was a key partner, and Ampaset as well. We needed to understand what is really the demand at the end of the day. What can converters work with and transformers, and what can't they? And what we found, and in many countries this is already well known, for us it was an aha moment, is blending post-consumer with post-commercial feedstock, so that post-industrial, post-commercial feedstock I spoke about that the recyclers already had, created a higher quality product, a product of sufficient quality for which the demand started to increase. Same with making sure you sort by color. Caramel, as we call it here, or cinnamon, as they call it in Brazil, more translucent, not transparent pellets have a certain value that's higher because you can use them for more applications, whereas black pellets can only become black again. They can't be colored. The value is lower. Splitting those up, sorting them, created more ability for the recycler to have a profitable business. Quality control. A lot of the recyclers struggle with really knowing the technicalities. They don't have the knowledge that Dow has or the knowledge that the converters have. So with the help of Dow, we went in and we helped the recyclers understand what are the right temperatures for extrusion, what are the right filter mesh sizes, what are the key configurations necessary. And many recyclers didn't have labs to conduct frequent samples. Is this material that I'm creating meeting the expectations of my customers? Ampaset helped and they offered their lab, so we were able to send materials frequently and test the melt flow index, the moisture, the ash, the volatiles, the density, to make sure that these materials were meeting the requirements. And then thanks to Dow, the recyclers typically sold to all types of different customers in small, not thanks to Dow, but this was before the project. The recyclers would send to all different types of customers, sporadic demand. A few pellets here, or a few tons of pellets here, a few tons of pellets there for this price, depending on what the customers wanted. It would go to anything from garbage bags to cables to construction materials to furniture. You can turn this into rigids, even this material. So the demand was very sporadic. The recyclers struggled because they didn't have large customers with regular orders. Bringing in those larger converters, for example, for garbage bags, but also for other materials, helped a lot to create stability. And that's where Dow made a big difference in bringing the market demand to the recyclers when they would not have been able to achieve themselves. What happened? We were able to increase in one recycler that we work with the most, 800% the volume that they were processing to 4,500 tons per year. We also were able to create pellets that were of the quality that was required by the end market. And then there was this third step, right? Because this is a supply and the demand, but the recycler itself also mattered. And they didn't have the capacity to suddenly grow times 8. Who would? This is where the Lines to End Plastic Waste stepped in again, because as we started the project on the supply side, we quickly started having successes, and those successes started building, and the subsidy was phasing out, and more sorting centers were calling us, wanting to join the program. And suddenly there was more material, more feedstock than the recycler could process. In this case, what the Alliance did is donate an extrusion and washing line as a test case to see, okay, can this, once the capacity is there, once the machinery is there, can the recycler operate in a self-sustaining manner? That made a huge difference. Of course it does when you donate the machinery to a recycler, but showing that afterwards it would be stable was vital. And what happened when we had more capacity, when you were able to produce more per month, actually the production price can go down. Because many recyclers have a fixed cost that's quite significant. For rent, in Argentina, electricity to a large degree is actually fixed because you have thresholds of contracts. Back office overhead, there were a lot of fixed costs that were leading to higher pellet prices. By scaling production, the variable or the fixed cost could go down, and thus the production price could go down, and the demand would increase because those converters that previously weren't willing to switch from virgin to recycled materials suddenly see an attractive price in which they are willing to switch. Besides that, there were a lot of other steps. For example, the recyclers started working 24/6, as what they called it. So they had 5.5 days of 24-hour production. The machines were always on, and half a day of maintenance. Sunday, the plant was closed, and on Monday it would start again. These are other ways to increase volume, reduce prices. What happened in the end, as the subsidy phased out, after the machinery was donated, we were able to increase production capacity from 50 to 400 tons per month in output, so in pellet sales, which was a massive difference for this recycler. Once the project ended, because it's now been completed, there was a fallback. They went from 400 to 200 tons per month because there was less help from us as Delterra, less help from the subsidy that was suddenly phased out. Everybody needed to get used to new reality. But I was there just last week. They're now coming up back into production, and they're reaching 400, 450 tons per month again, going into 500, and the production prices are lower than they were before, and they now have a self-sustaining business. So yes, there was a bit of a shock effect, but it has now been accustomed, and we see this recycler continuing to operate. So in that sense, the project was a big success. I'm going to go slightly further for just 5 more minutes, and then we're opening it up to questions. Because what we've spoken about so far is this part, the recycled and the rejected. The recycled is what happened before the green, before the project started. In Greater Buenos Aires, 3% flexible plastics were recycled. Now we doubled that, so it's now 6 by reducing the amount of waste being rejected at sorting centers. We're nearing the maximum that we could do at these sorting centers. What is the next horizon? Where do you go from here? Because together you're only at 6%. That's when we started working together with Dow again and with Benito Rogio Ambiental, which is the operator, the largest waste management company of Argentina, and also the owner of Texan, who's the operator of the MBT. And we started asking them, is there something we can do with the 9% that arrives in your single location that's not sent directly to landfill, but is currently not being sorted? This that you see in the video is the MBT. And what you see is you see mixed waste from Buenos Aires coming in. It goes through a series of trommels. And then at the end, it goes into what should have been sorting cabins of mixed waste. This is what happened the first few months the plant was operational and people were sorting. But they discovered that actually the demand for this material didn't exist and didn't justify the extra sorting costs. So for the last few years, MBT no longer has people working here. Actually, the only thing that happens is it goes through TROMOS, the waste is reduced, organics are set aside for anaerobic digestion, reducing the amount sent to the landfill, and then MBT in that way is profitable. But all of these recyclable materials that arrive there every day aren't separated. So what we started to do is we started looking, can we change the configuration of the MBT to focus specifically on flexible plastics? How? After the trommels have extra blowers, only have the most lightweight materials come out. And as you can see here on the left, this is the type of material that can be separated today with limited investment. The blower was relatively, I'm going to pause this one for a second. The blower was relatively affordable. It's been installed, and they once tried this for CDR or for co-processing with cement companies, but it didn't quite work. So we said, well, let us try. Let us try to see if we can work with this material, because it looks to us that it's good enough for recycling. What we did is we started sorting it manually. Now that makes no sense financially. It is extremely expensive and it is not self-sustaining, but it did allow us to test what is this material like and is it of good enough quality for recycling. So what we did is we sorted a total of 120 tons and we started extruding and washing it together with Benito Roggio and with Ampacet helping out on the lab test. And then we started testing, is this good enough for example, garbage bags? Guess what? It is. The melt flow index is of sufficient quality, the moisture, the ash, the density. So with that, we start looking into a new source of supply beyond sorting centers, automatic sortation for mixed waste. What would it require? It would require automating the second step, because manually sorting this material doesn't make much sense. But with the technology today, you can actually sort it automatically in large volumes. Conclusion. Is this only something that can work in Buenos Aires? Perhaps. The MBT is only here. There is no MBT in, for example, Sao Paulo. But we believe that in cities, often larger cities with high concentrations of waste, there is an opportunity to start sorting more and more recyclables, a direction that's been taken, for example, in Europe, where increasingly mixed waste is being sorted. And we believe the same can be true in Latin America, and especially in a context where perhaps policy can help through EPR fees. What's our next step? Our next step is to work in Sao Paulo, and we've already started. Because Sao Paulo, it doesn't have an MBT, but it does have mechanized sorting plants, such as these. And what you see is similar patterns as we saw before. In this case, a lot of flexible plastics that arrive that could be sorted, but this, neither he nor the ladies in the bottom are actually sorting out the flexible plastics. They're doing some quality control, and in this case, in the bottom, it goes to CDR, or sorry, RDF in English. In the top, it's mixed with paper and other plastics and sold as in bunch. But the opportunity, once you are at a conveyor belt like this or like this, to start separating out flexible plastics and recycling them is large. And these are relatively clean materials because they come from source segregated waste from selective collection. Then we're working with the Cooper Cups, which is a cooperative in Sao Paulo, to start sorting this material. And then we would send it to recyclers just like we did in Buenos Aires. And we're starting to see, can we do the same as we did there? Can we create a self-sustaining business case for flexible plastics recycling? With the added advantage that the policy environment in Brazil is a bit more favorable than it is in Argentina. That was half an hour of talking. I hope that everybody's still here, and happy to open the floor up for questions.
Thank you so much, Rainier. We do have a few questions in the chat that I will read through, but also please feel free if you would like to use the raise hand functionality and we can call on you to see your question live. So first question for us today is from Carolina. What happens once you stop subsidizing the collection of flexible PCR film? Is the material still collected at the same rate, or does the volume drop once the payments end?
A really good question. The subsidy was something that we artificially introduced. In a way, it functions like an EPR fee could function, but that didn't happen in Argentina. What we designed, and I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I think it's important to share how we designed this. We designed it to start at a certain level, 50% above the market price, and within a year in the sorting center go to zero. What we saw is that after it reached zero, the sorting center continued to sort the materials. Now that sounds fantastic. How is that possible? And why would they do that? Why didn't they do it before? Because of that trust equation. Once they had the trust in the recycler and the recycler had the rhythm to come every week with the same truck and be reliable and pay on time, a lot of the uncertainty for the sorting center or for the cooperative was taken away. Because suddenly they had a reliable customer that would come back and come back and come back. So in the vast majority of cases, I won't say all, but in almost all sorting centers, we see them now sort flexible plastics where they didn't just 2 years ago. Would they sort as much as they could have if the subsidy was there? Maybe not, because at the end of the day, it also has to justify their effort. But in general, just by the sheer size that is now arriving at recyclers that didn't before, we see that they continue to operate. And the recycler now has a steady inflow of volume. They have less uncertainty themselves. They have a greater willingness to pay because they can now trust the sorting center source, the supplier for materials, and the economic disadvantage of building a relationship is no longer there because they already have it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Marcia, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly.
Hi, Marcio Amazonas from Next Loop. I'm based in Brazil, in São Paulo. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
That's phone. But question is, are you exploiting the food grade market as a way to compensate recyclers with a little higher level? And especially from Dow, I would like to understand what is the strategy to use PCR in film in Latin America or Argentina. Thank you. We're doing that for PP, for polypropylene, and that's a very successful strategy. But unfortunately, Brazil and Argentina are together in the prohibition. Only PET can be recycled food grade, as you know.
Yes, absolutely. We are not thinking in food contact films. We are looking for addressing another markets. We explore trash bags, and we know that construction market also demand this type of product. So as you mentioned, we are not for mechanical recycling for this waste stream for this project that we focus on mechanical recycling. We didn't include food contact films in as market. No.
Thank you.
And as you said, just to stress, it's also because regulation prevents it. Outside of PET, it's simply not allowed here.
Lisa, go ahead.
No, thank you. Lisa from IFC, International Finance Corporation. I want to say, first of all, congratulations. We couldn't agree more on the need to have this systemic approach. It feels like you've articulated so well what I think we need to be doing in multiple markets. Now, I wanted to ask, because one of the things we've been thinking about is how do we increase the demand even more? So you're talking about trash bags. Have you looked into things like asphalt and cement for road construction? Or, we know that the automotive companies, a lot of them are looking at, they've got targets for having recycled content in the production of their vehicles. Are there opportunities to look for high volume, commercially viable applications for this kind of mechanically, recycle low grade plastic? Yes, it's downcycling. Yes, I know there's a philosophy around that. But at the end of the day, the more that we can create the demand, and you address the demand and the feedstock, right? And the feedstock and the informality and the traceability, I think those are super key elements. And I'm just curious, how wide you went in terms of application. And I'm assuming there's technical requirements based on the composition of the waste in your local context that would impact that too, right?
Yes, it's a very difficult and question, but we are working a lot in creating the demand, and it's not easy. It's very difficult. We don't have an EPR law in Argentina. We don't see brand owners pushing this product or pulling this demand. So we are trying to push, and it's not easy. When we go with this PCR to one of our customers to do some test, it was not easy. Filters get more. We need to change the filters with more frequency, so it is not easy, and we are working a lot in different markets to try to give them a competitive PCR, because one of the questions there of Jeff, uh, we need to give them a competitive pellet, because if not, they will use virgin. Um, yes, we need to give them a cheaper one, or less the same price of virgin, if we have the commitment of the customer of the brand. But we are working in a lot of markets. The thing is that we have only one product. So we have a product that has a melt index 1 and density 0.95. So we aren't able to have different products for different markets. So we are working a lot. We need to transform with our technology and with our knowledge, transform these pellets to address more and more markets.
Nicola, do you have any perspective to add from the Alliance? Because I know that you work with a lot of different solutions as well over the world.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself, actually. Thanks, Rainier. Yeah, I wanted to comment, actually, because I've been dealing with flexible recycling in many countries worldwide, actually. And what is happening in Argentina in this case, but in South America, is not uncommon in most of the countries, because, as you mentioned, Lisa, of technical challenges, because of qualification and certification requirements, like for asphalt, for road paving. We have done very many projects, as in Southeast Asia, in India. It takes quite a long time to get a certification for those applications. So creating the demand is a very long-term process, which, I mean, organizations like the Alliance have initiated, but is not coming up so quickly. Automotive is a special space, right? Because also of the potential sensitivity to, to performance of some of those applications. Okay, there are also lower end application in automotive, for example, for polypropylene, where you could use film PP films, but then you would need to separate PP from PE at quite a high rate of purity. So to say is a little bit a chicken and the egg game. So we need to develop these markets, and why we develop the markets, we need to be able to support the players, as we did in Argentina, with incentives and with upgrading of their technology. So it's, as you said, actually, you summarized it very well, it's all about systemic solutions. And the investment is a multi-year investment, typically.
And I think this ties into Jeff's question in the chat as well. Ivan, I know you referenced it. Jeff, I don't know if you're online and wanted to come live for the question.
Yeah, hi. Jeff Denby from the Coca-Cola Foundation. Yeah, I mean, this is the question that seems to be emerging from this conversation, is that we can do it, but what is the ongoing demand business model here? Because there is no economic incentive nor policy incentive in many countries for brands to pay the extra price here. And so while we can prop it up at the beginning with subsidizing, that's great. But as we look at programs around the world, this is a major thing that we try to figure out as well. How do we create demand? And so you mentioned you were doing a lot of things to create demand, but I'm not clear what those things are to create demand. So maybe you could help like expand on what the things are.
This is quite new because this project, the thing here is that each stream is different. So create demand, we need to have different strategies for each waste stream. So we need to create a plan that is different to one that we have in Brazil, to one that we have in the United States, and the one we have in Europe. So it's like very tailor-made this. So the first thing is we have a plan. We want to make this happen, and we are creating a plan to try to build the demand step by step. So then we can to create the chicken, so we can have the egg. We are in that path, and one of the thing is to test the PCR. See, don't be scared, because today our car customers, they are very comfortable with Virgin, and it's not easy for them to change the resin, the raw material. So one of the things that we are trying to say to the market is we have a good performance PCR, we have a competitive one, so let's try it. Let's go step by step and start to build this volume. But we have to do it in each customer, for each waste stream. So, but we are on that. We are working on that. We want to be the supplier of this type of products.
And to follow up on Yvonne, our CEO is actually also on the line. Shannon, I think you might have a response to this.
Thank you, Steph. Hi, so this is perfect segue, because we're actually just launching a piece of work in the US to look at building out these markets. So there are lots of places where PCR could be incorporated in LDPE, PCR could be incorporated into products, but it's not being today. And so along those very lines, we're trying to identify what are those biggest markets, and can we work with those companies, especially in the sort of construction and ag space, to figure out, could we actually open up those spaces for the use of PCR in products where maybe the specs will allow for it, or maybe it's over-spec'd for those products, and that they could actually reduce the specs and incorporate. So, I mean, a perfect example is something like Tyvek film that is wrapped around houses. That is 100% virgin today. There's no reason why it has to be beautiful and brand spanking white. And absolutely no reason why it couldn't incorporate PCR. So we're exactly looking into trying to build out those markets by running field tests on these products and expanding those markets. And we're just launching that with Amcor and Kraft Heinz.
And one more thing, Jeff, we are also working in communicate also, because we think that communicate it also spread the idea of and the willingness to do the same. So we are also trying to work on that, to show the market what we are doing, what some brand is doing, and try to spread that message.
But if I may add, the countries which manage to have high recycling rate of flexibles to make that business model viable, including the capex investment of the technologies which are required to meet some of this demand, have a very high level of EPR fees. And that's a way for the system to be sustained until the volume is big enough and the scale is large enough to create some economy of scale for the players in the chain, right? So Belgium is one of those examples. Belgium has currently EPR fees up to $2,400 dollars per ton of flexibles material put in the market. And then you can compensate with accumulated policies where you reduce those EPR fees for the companies who incorporate more recycled material in their final products. But is quite a high level of subsidies that is required to maintain that business model viable.
The other mechanism that you can, of course, use is a regulation on how much recycled material has to be incorporated into certain products, right? If you mandate it, makes a big difference too.
Yeah.
And Rainer, just wanted to see if you had any other comments before I call on, and I'm sorry, G. Cross.
No, let's keep the conversation going. I love it.
G, go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Gabriel Crosta from Santa Rosa Plásticos in Buenos Aires. My comment is, since you are looking for different market segments where to channel these films, have you looked at the mulching films? That is a large volume demanding for protection of crops, and these films with the proper additives can be used in that application, and then it will be a nice life ending of the material converted into particles that would I'm sorry, I'm looking for the right word. Mixed with the earth and get away of the environment in around 90 and 120 days. Have you looked at that market segment?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to answer your question, we do intend to look at that. It depends on which country you're in, because in some countries that's regulated as it has to be food grade to go into soil and agriculture. And then your question about like the degradation of the material into the soil, I think you're thinking maybe of compostable plastics.
Yes, that's right. With the right additive, you can convert the films into compostable plastics that meet the regulations for the time frame in which they degrade and compound with the soil.
We'll look into that for sure.
Thank you.
And Ivan, was there more you wanted to add?
My comment was the same as Shannon said.
I mean, if I may add, in agricultural plastics, many countries use the flexible for irrigation pipes, which are, actually flexible in nature, not rigid pipes. And that's a typical market in Southern Europe, for example, in some areas of Asia, etc. Unfortunately, is not a gigantic volume because you really need a lot of volume absorption, but every market helps in the end. So the more we can develop and validate, the better it is for the business case.
And I did want to just call out, I believe earlier, Carolina, you had your hand raised. I just want to make sure we got to your question if you still had it.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. No, I just want to add to Lisa's comment or previous question regarding the demand of the material. I was wondering, in your presentation, you mentioned like those when we think about downcycling, one of the thing is those are not like so much of valuable goods. So do you think there's is there a variable that we need to consider when we look at those valuable goods in creating demand, in the sense that it would be best to actually produce through mechanical recycling much like good valuable goods that are more durable goods that can be I don't know, sell best, or that's something that actually doesn't matter, like in the applications when we see PCR content for LDPE or those kind of polyethylenes post-consume, it's much less than maybe, I don't know, bricks or in construction. Does it make the difference in what you have seen, or it is not makes any difference? I don't know if I was clear with my question.
I don't know if I understood the question correctly, but the thing is, I want to try to, if I understand good, but if you think in bricks, the thing is the value that the customer has to, or the market has to the PCR. So we need to go to the market that with like high value markets. and that is directly linked to the price. So we need to go first for that type of markets. Perhaps a wood or bricks producer can buy anything from the market. So it's very difficult with all this process to go against like tutti, we call here, and running costs are like a PCR that don't have any treatment, any washing process. So we go through all this value chain trying to get a high value PCR to go to high value segments. We are not thinking in all this process to go to that type of applications, not because they don't have value, they have a lot of value, but they don't value this type of PCR.
Got it. Thank you, Marco.
And we will take our final question from Lisa. If you did have a question that we weren't able to answer in the chat, we will email you after with some responses. So please feel free to do that. And without further ado, Lisa.
Well, I'm going to defer. I see Gianluca, my colleague, and his hand is up as well. And so since I've already asked a question, but I do want to say IFC is leaning in the same approach, especially in Brazil and India, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I just want to really put a flag out there that we would be very keen to work with those of you who are already doing this kind of work on where's the demand. My question would have been, do you start with the composition of the waste and then identify the applications and then try and sell it? But I intend to reach out and have a separate conversation on this because very keen to leverage all the work that's been done. But Gianluca, do you want to jump in with a question?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. Just a comment just to reinforce the importance of demand. I'll give you a practical example. We're working on a project in Latin America for RDF production, right? And we're doing a feasibility study and we're deciding, looking at the detailed technical solution, how much we want to send into RDF versus how much we're trying to capture plastics for recycling. And when we need to make a decision on that, right? Maybe on the PET that's still in the residual waste stream, there is confidence that we can invest into extracting that and have a market. But when we looked at the flexible plastic element, if we're faced with the option of, okay, should we just let it go into the RDF, produce a higher quality material for what will be what we expect long-term arrangements, right, with an off-taker, which may be part of the project or just an off-taker with a certain price certainty versus invest in machinery to divert that plastic for recycling in a market where there is a lot of uncertainty. I mean, from an investment perspective, we're going to have to go for the safer routes, right? So I think the demand aspect ultimately is key, and that needs to be clearly in place to make long-term investment decisions, right? Otherwise, it's still better, I guess, to put it into RDF, for example, if there is an option, then just to let it go to land. So, but I know it's a very complex aspect to contain.
Gianluca, and we're running out of time, but just as a quick response, we had this interesting conversation in Sao Paulo just 2 months ago, where you have one of the sorting centers that I was showing you, the semi-automated ones, sending to RDF, and it comes a bit to Abe's question in the chat. They were sending materials mixed to RDF for about $25 per ton. Whereas in Sao Paulo, if you separate the plastics, at least the translucent ones, where they have an abundance of that went to RDF, with just perhaps 3 or 4 more people on the line, you could get $200 per ton. So the economics are vital. I think it's interesting in your calculations to look at from the sorting point where the waste decision is made, what is the difference? Because in this case, we found that it would, for the sorter, be economically much more attractive to add a few more people on the line to sort those translucent, clearer materials than send it to RDF. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and it's also case by case, right? Because I think you also said in Buenos Aires, for example, doing manually doesn't make sense, right? You need automation. So I think
or mixed waste. No, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, Sao Paulo also has a interesting contract in place for the next 20 years, where those 2 companies doing the collection are required to put a lot of investment into recycling, right? Which is not the case everywhere else. So yeah, it's also a case by case situation.
Well, thank
All
you,
right. Well,
everybody.
yeah. Sorry, Steph and I are both fighting to see who unmutes first, but maybe I'll just officially wrap us up now then, and just thank you for everyone for sticking around a few more minutes and being so engaged in the excellent discussion. I think we could have gone on for another half an hour at least with questions. So please do follow up with us. I think you've got our email addresses. Like, we're very happy to answer anything by email, and we're going to share this recording on our YouTube channel as well, so you can send to any colleagues or anyone else who wasn't able to join that you think would be interested. So thank you so much. Thanks to all of our presenters and for everyone who joined, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much.
Bye-bye.